In the middle of the night, a pink-haired girl looked at her hands and wondered what she had been doing. She touched and felt something, noting that it felt too hard to be a bed sheet. She realized that she was on top of a handsome man who was sleeping. Shocked, she recognized the man as Grand Duke Glenn and screamed out in embarrassment. Blushing, she questioned what was going on and if it was a dream. Then Duke Glenn woke up with his hands tied in rope. The girl found the situation crazy and internally berated herself, thinking that she, Vivian Lewis, had gone insane for kidnapping the Grand Duke. Vivian became anxious. Vivian was only 14 years old when she first caught sight of the Grand Duke at the debutante ball, a place brimming with young girls' hopes and dreams. At the ball, she thought to herself that maybe she would be able to meet a handsome person and start dating. Suddenly, she heard others exclaiming about the arrival of Grand Duke Glenn and admiring his handsomeness. Vivian wondered who Grand Duke Glenn was and saw him descending the stairs. She recalled that Lennox Elpidian Glenn was 18 years old at the time, having inherited the title at 17 and being treated as a respectable aristocrat. He shone as brightly as a diamond. In that moment, Vivian fell in love with him, knowing that she was the type to fall in love easily. That day, Vivian fell in love with the Grand Duke at first sight, marking the beginning of 7 years of die-hard fangirling. Since that day, she began secretly drawing him. Vivian thought to herself that it was a relief she was good at drawing. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to capture every moment of the Grand Duke. Except for her family and close friends, she was able to secretly admire him without anyone else knowing. Blushing, she thought that if she had hired an artist to draw thousands, no, tens of thousands of pictures, she probably would have seemed crazy. Though she admitted that her own behavior wasn't exactly normal either. When we see Vivian's room, the walls are completely covered with drawings of Duke Lennox Glenn. Everything in her room is adorned with pictures of Lennox, and she even has a big pillow with the full drawing of him on it. She calls this heaven. Instantly hugging the Lennox pillow, Vivian exclaims that the Grand Duke is everywhere. She feels thrilled and declares that she wants to live like this forever and not get married, even though her parents keep arranging marriage proposals. She repeats that she doesn't want to get married. Suddenly, a girl enters Vivian's room and asks if she's at it again. Vivian excitedly runs toward her, calling her Marina, and hugs her. Marina asks how long Vivian is going to keep admiring the Grand Duke. Vivian responds that fangirling over the Grand Duke makes her the happiest, drawing pictures of him and writing fan-fiction novels about dating him. Marina questions what Vivian will do if she ends up dying old and alone. Vivian stammers, saying she wouldn't be alone because she has her younger brother, Cassian. Marina counters, asking if Cassian has ever looked at her and called her pathetic. Vivian begins to cry and sniffle. Mariana, exasperated, tells Vivian to stop crying and hands her a bag, saying she has somewhere to go and asking Vivian to take care of it. Vivian asks what it is, and Mariana explains that it's her items, including some dangerous ones, and instructs Vivian never to open it. Mariana then says she'll be back soon and leaves. Mariana is a sorceress currently studying at an academy in the Empire's capital. Since her hometown is very far from the institution, she's indebted to Vivian's house, which is closer and like family to her. Then, Vivian looks through an album filled with pictures of the Grand Duke. She admits to herself that she wants to look at it even more since Mariana told her not to. She thinks about the bag that Mariana dropped earlier and wonders if she can just open it and take a little peek. Vivian rationalizes that Mariana never shows her anything dangerous on purpose because she thinks of her as a younger sister. She grabs the bag and thinks about how long Mariana plans on treating her like a kid. She resolves to only take a quick look before putting it back where it was, assuring herself not to worry. As Vivian is about to open Mariana's bag, she realizes that an album filled with pictures of the Grand Duke is torn apart. She screams in distress, lamenting the damage to her Grand Duke merchandise. With disappointment, she starts cleaning up, apologizing to the pictures for not being able to protect them. She thinks it would be embarrassing to call the maids after making such a mess and finds cleaning tiring. While cleaning, she notices a large marble that fell out of the bag. She picks it up and sees her reflection in it. Panicking, she decides to quickly put it back in the bag, but she loses her balance, causing the marble to slip from her hand and fall to the floor, shattering into pieces. Terrified, she realizes that the marble belonged to Mariana and cries out for help, feeling desperate and fearful about what to do. Vivian, teary-eyed, reflects that everything went wrong because of the marble and blames herself for opening Mariana's bag. She thinks she's an idiot for her actions and wishes she hadn't done it. Suddenly, she hears Lennox speak, asking why she doesn't finish what she started and expressing a preference for her to continue what she was doing with a smile. Vivian becomes anxious as she realizes Lennox is awake. Internally, she is shocked, questioning how someone like her could have kidnapped the Sword Master Grand Duke and tied him to the bed. She imagines Lennox should be furious and threatening her, saying that she must have a death wish for daring to kidnap him. Lennox addresses Vivian, asking why she seems so melancholic. Vivian responds with a shaky voice, unsure of how to explain. Internally, she is shocked and dismayed, never imagining she would become a Grand Duke kidnapper at the age of 21. She worries that the imperial family's investigating officers will soon arrive, and upon seeing her room filled with drawings of the Grand Duke, will react with horror, saying that it gives them goosebumps. Lennox reassured Vivian that there was no need to be melancholic and asked her to come closer. Vivian, realizing the situation and feeling flustered, immediately apologized and said she would quickly untie his hands. Lennox, somewhat surprised, told her it was okay. Vivian, confused and distressed, wondered if the rope she had used was really tight. She began to untie him, feeling regretful for injuring the Grand Duke's valuable body. As she saw the rope marks on his wrists, she started to cry, lamenting the damage she had caused. Lennox then patted her head and assured her that a wound like that was nothing to him. Vivian asked Lennox if he was aware that he had been kidnapped and that she was the kidnapper. Lennox laughed and in a surprisingly relaxed manner mentioned that he actually enjoyed being tied up, assuming that such a situation was to Vivian's taste. Vivian was confused and nervous, questioning why Lennox was addressing her so familiarly despite them never having had a proper conversation before. She wondered if he had gone crazy because of the kidnapping and felt panic about what she should do next. Vivian, showing her middle finger, asked Lennox how many fingers she was holding up. Lennox replied with one, and Vivian confirmed it was correct. She then asked for Lennox's full name, to which he responded with Lennox Elpinian Glenn. Vivian noted that he seemed to be conscious of that detail. She wondered why he was being so gentle and if he might actually be enjoying the situation. Lennox then called her name and she responded anxiously. Lennox mentioned that he had heard she wanted to make a mess of him. Vivian, startled, denied the accusation, coughing and stammering in her attempt to refute it. Lennox approached Vivian and said he had heard that she wanted to do this from the moment she first saw him. He then took her hand and kissed it. Vivian was stunned and blushing, struggling to process what had just happened. Internally, she panicked, realizing that the Grand Duke was in her room and that her actions had revealed her long-time obsession with him. She was horrified by the realization that her secret of fangirling over the Grand Duke for nearly 7 years had come to light. Vivian couldn't believe what was happening and tried to make sense of Duke Lennox's actions. She thought about why the Duke might be behaving this way, realizing that even if one were in a tiger's cave, staying alert was crucial for survival. However, this was not a tiger's cave but her bedroom, and the Duke was not a tiger. She wondered what he must have thought upon seeing the walls covered with his paintings and worried that he might have concluded he was kidnapped by a stalker. Vivian concluded that he might be pretending to listen to her to buy some time. She wanted to explain to him that it wasn't as he thought, but struggled with how to address the situation. She had only wanted to observe him from afar and hoped he would remember her as a nice lady. Now she felt horrified that she had turned into a stalker in his eyes and was unsure how to explain the whole situation to him. Vivian, anxiously thinking about whether she should try to make an excuse, felt it might be better than doing nothing. She decided to speak up. She addressed Lennox, explaining that kidnapping him was a mistake, and that she had meant to do it. She mentioned breaking a strange marble earlier and went on to explain that she had never had a serious relationship because she was so focused on him. She had dreamed of falling in love with him until she turned 16, but then faced the reality that, as the daughter of a poor family, such dreams were unrealistic. She wondered if the dark energy from the black marble had influenced her. Vivian expressed her concern about how her parents and Cassian would react and pleaded with Lennox to say something, feeling distressed by his silence. Lennox acknowledged Vivian's explanation, saying he understood. Vivian was excited and couldn't believe his response. Lennox then recapped her story, asking if she had broken the strange black marble left by her wizard friend, experienced black smoke, lost consciousness, and then found him tied up when she woke. Vivian confirmed this was exactly what happened. As she observed Lennox, she marveled at his aura and beauty, relieved that things were somewhat okay, though she thought they could have been worse. Lennox, however, questioned how he could believe her story, asking if she was lying. Vivian, sweating nervously, insisted that she was telling the truth. Vivian reflected on the situation, fearing that if other ladies who admired Duke Lennox knew she was the kidnapper, she would face severe consequences, possibly even prison. She panicked at the thought of being buried alive and realized she didn't want that outcome. She had always wanted to love the Duke from afar and live a happy life, similar to others. She explained that her admiration for the Duke led her to create paintings and decorate her room, but she had never intended to harm anyone, including the Duke. She wished she could turn back time to before she opened Mariana's bag. As she began to cry, Lennox wiped her tears and, in a comforting gesture, hugged her. Vivian asked Lennox why he was being so nice to her, expressing her distress at the idea that he might believe she intentionally kidnapped him. She insisted that it was a mistake caused by the black marble. Lennox teased her, acknowledging that she did indeed kidnap him. Vivian, crying loudly, insisted that it was an accident and that the black marble was to blame. Lennox, in a sarcastic tone, pretended to be scared and said he was terrified of being kidnapped. Vivian was frustrated, insisting that the incident was due to magic and not her intention. Internally, she reflected on Lennox's behavior, noting that despite his teasing, he was still incredibly handsome. Lennox teased Vivian, saying that his mates would arrive soon and that she would end up in prison. Scared, Vivian began pulling at her hair in fear, exclaiming that she didn't want that to happen. Lennox stopped her, advising her not to ruin her beautiful hair and suggesting that there was a way to resolve the situation. She should become his lover. Vivian, tearful, was stunned by his proposition, questioning if he really meant to make her his lover. Lennox confirmed his suggestion. As she processed this, she marveled at Lennox's beautiful eyes but tried to focus on the more pressing issue rather than getting distracted by his appearance. Vivian was taken aback when Lennox proposed that she become his lover. She reflected on the implications of this, realizing that being a lover meant not being a fiancé or partner, but rather just for his entertainment, which she found insulting. She recognized that Lennox was the only high-ranking noble in the Elpidus Empire, with his family controlling a large portion of the territory and wielding power comparable to the emperor. She believed there was no way he would marry someone like her. Additionally, she had heard rumors that he was expected to marry a princess from a neighboring country, and that she would be his official wife. Vivian feared that she would be used temporarily and then discarded. Lennox asked Vivian what she was going to do. Nervously, Vivian thought to herself that there seemed to be only one right answer and no real choice in the matter. She realized that Lennox knew she couldn't refuse his proposal. Agreeing to be his lover appeared to be the simplest way out of her situation, but she considered that Mariana could testify about the black marble. However, since Mariana was from a poor family, no one would trust her. Vivian felt she had no choice but to comply. Vivian agreed to become Lennox's lover, but insisted on having a contract. Lennox was surprised by the mention of a contract, and Vivian confirmed that she wanted a formal deal. Vivian felt proud of her idea to include a contract, believing it would allow them to part ways without complications and provide a framework to discuss the details. She hoped that Lennox would be satisfied with something as simple as a kiss, though she wondered if he might have more unconventional desires despite his classy appearance. Lennox, however, expressed sadness upon hearing about the contract, interpreting it as an indication that Vivian didn't want a serious relationship with him. Vivian internally reflected on the absurdity of this, noting that this was the first time she had a conversation with him and questioning what he meant by a serious relationship. Vivian, feeling nervous, suggested that to have a serious relationship, they would need to start over. Lennox, upset, turned away and acknowledged that she was indeed his kidnapper. Vivian was confused by his reaction. Lennox then inquired about the terms of their arrangement. Vivian admitted she wasn't sure and wondered how long would be appropriate, months or years. She tentatively proposed a term of 6 months, but Lennox seemed displeased. Unsure if 6 months was too long, she suggested 4 months instead, only to receive a similarly unhappy response from Lennox. Desperate, Vivian lowered the term to 2 months, but Lennox, visibly angry, ignored her suggestion. Vivian was puzzled, wondering how long Lennox actually wanted the term to be, or if he didn't want to sign the contract after all, despite having mentioned it first. She questioned if she had misunderstood his intentions. Suddenly, Lennox excitedly suggested a term of 1 year. Vivian was surprised and found it hard to believe. Vivian, groaning, questioned if 1 year was too long, but then heard Lennox insist that anything less would be too short for him. Reluctantly, she agreed to a love contract for 1 year. Lennox then asked her to swear, which startled Vivian. Internally, she questioned the necessity of swearing for such an important thing, but seeing Lennox's serious expression, she realized its significance. Hesitantly, Vivian began to swear, stating her name and Lennox's, committing to become each other's contract lovers for 1 year. She internally wondered if swearing to God about a love contract was appropriate or even blasphemous. Lennox comforted Vivian by gently rubbing her, telling her she was obedient and good. Confused, Vivian asked why he was suddenly using honorifics. Lennox explained that, as they were now lovers, he would use honorifics out of respect for her in the future. Sweating, Vivian acknowledged his thoughtfulness. Lennox affirmed this, referring to her as my cute Vivian. Blushing and in disbelief, Vivian wondered if she had heard him correctly, noting that he had called her cute and even used the possessive my. She speculated that Lennox might have inhaled something strange, questioning if the air in her room was dangerous. Vivian, realizing the pictures of Lennox covering the walls, wondered if she should ask him to leave the room for a bit as she felt shy about them. Nervously, she suggested that since it was already late at night, it would be better for him to return to his mansion. Lennox, however, responded that he didn't know what they should do now and lightly grabbed her, suggesting they finish what was left unfinished. As Lennox gently pulled her toward him, Vivian, with a shaky voice, questioned what he meant by left unfinished. Anxiously, she thought to herself, trying to understand what he was referring to and how to proceed, as she couldn't remember everything. Lennox pointed out that his shirt had been taken off and asked Vivian who she thought had done it. Vivian, bewildered, suggested that maybe he had taken it off himself. Internally, she was certain that she had removed his shirt. Lennox clarified that he had expressed it wrong and someone must have ripped it up. When Vivian saw the ripped shirt, she screamed in disbelief, sat down on the floor, and pulled at her hair, yelling in shock. She questioned if it was possible that she had torn it, though she found it hard to believe. Internally, she came to the realization that the culprit in this situation was none other than herself. Lennox gently warned Vivian that if she kept pulling her hair, she might lose it all, but reassured her that she would still be cute even if she were bald. Vivian, flustered, retorted that the Grand Duke would look cool even if he were bald too. Lennox thanked her and told her not to worry about his ripped shirt, suggesting that it wasn't a big deal to rip it off if she wanted to. Vivian, blushing and laughing nervously, thanked him, still trying to adapt to the Grand Duke's unexpected sweetness. Internally, Vivian's thoughts conflicted. One part of her, her angelic side, rationalized that this kindness was a privilege of being his lover, while her devilish side argued that Lennox was always gentle regardless. The angelic side became angry at the devilish side for this assertion, insisting that it was indeed a special privilege. Vivian reflected on how the Grand Duke, once perceived as a cold sculptural figure often dubbed the Ice Prince, a nickname that many young ladies admired, was now showing a surprising gentleness. Unlike his usual demeanor, which was reserved and rarely expressive, he now smiled more often and spoke more emotionally. This change in him made Vivian question if it was due to the magic tool from Marina, particularly since the Duke had even suggested a romantic relationship, albeit a contractual one. She wondered if the black orb had altered his behavior, as she had been concerned about its effects ever since. Vivian addressed the Grand Duke with a sense of hesitation, and the Grand Duke responded by asking if she wanted to complete what had been left unfinished. Flustered, Vivian vehemently denied any intention of doing so. She internally questioned what exactly was left unfinished and wondered if moving forward with it so quickly was too abrupt. As she sweated nervously, she shifted the conversation to asking for his opinion about her room. The Grand Duke, observing her bedroom for the first time, took note of the numerous pictures of himself adorning the walls. Vivian felt embarrassed as he took in the sight. Vivian nervously wondered why the Grand Duke needed to prompt her with his blunt comment about finding her room creepy. She was astonished by his unexpected observation, as she had always known him to be in a bad mood. Despite feeling relieved that he wasn't uncomfortable, she was frustrated with her own emotions and tried to attribute it to her mood. When the Grand Duke inquired if there was anything else she was curious about, she mentioned the love contract. The Grand Duke encouraged her to speak further, but Vivian internally pleaded for him to stop overwhelming her with his charm. Vivian hesitated, contemplating the boundaries of their contractual relationship. She nervously considered the types of physical contact allowed, such as holding hands, hugging, or kissing. When Lennox asked how much she wanted, Vivian was caught off guard and struggled to respond. She had never thought of such intimate gestures in this context and felt embarrassed. She suggested a simple hug, but upon seeing Lennox's reaction, quickly reconsidered and opted for just holding hands, believing that hugging might be too personal for their contractual arrangement. Lennox, confused by her response, questioned if hugging was truly too intimate, noting that their relationship was based on a contract. Lennox gently held her hand and expressed affectionately that even in a contractual relationship, love should be embraced fully until the end. Vivian hesitated, unsure about the idea of continuing with the relationship until the end. Lennox reassured her, suggesting that a hug is just the beginning, and hinted at progressing to kisses and beyond. Vivian blushed at the mention of the next step and felt anxious, thinking about how it might be too risky or premature since they were not yet married and their relationship was still new. Vivian brought up the topic of marriage, mentioning that someone was discussing Lennox's marriage. Lennox asked for clarification about who was involved in this discussion. Vivian thought about the political nature of noble marriages, noting that such unions are often used to strengthen family ties and secure alliances. She reflected on how her own parents, Marina's parents, and even her brother Cajan had all entered into political marriages rather than ones based on love. She reasoned that given Lennox's high status as a noble and his mother's royal background, he would likely marry a princess of significant lineage, either from within the empire or from another country. Vivian wondered why Lennox would be discussing such matters with her, given that it seemed obvious that he would follow this political tradition. Lennox embraced Vivian and moved in for a kiss, which left her in a state of disbelief and panic, feeling she might faint. When Lennox asked if he could kiss her, Vivian was confused and unsure why he was being so sudden. Lennox then suggested that after kissing, they could proceed to the next step, implying a deeper commitment that would lead to marriage. This made Vivian nervous and anxious, as she was overwhelmed by the situation and considered whether she should take drastic action to handle the unexpected turn of events. Despite her inner turmoil, Lennox proceeded to kiss her. Vivian, in disbelief, reflected on the situation, realizing that she was indeed kissing the Grand Duke, which felt like something out of a real romantic relationship. The thought of someone potentially witnessing this made her even more flustered. She pulled back to take a deep breath, only to be surprised when Lennox mentioned that it was possible to breathe while kissing. As she processed this, Lennox comforted her by gently hugging her and asked when she had started to like him. Vivian nervously replied that she had liked him for quite a while, but internally, she thought she couldn't admit to following him for 7 years as it might scare him. When Lennox asked how much she liked him, she hesitated and said that the Grand Duke was an unapproachable person to her. Reflecting on her feelings, she realized that while it started as a fresh love, it had evolved into something akin to worship. She compared him to a starry sky, finding the possibility of a serious relationship with him unbelievable. Determined, she resolved to break up with him peacefully after 1 year, without causing any trouble. Lennox kissed her hand softly and expressed his hope that Vivian would feel more comfortable with him. Vivian, feeling embarrassed, questioned if he was serious. Lennox then suggested they should talk, to which Vivian was surprised and asked for clarification. Lennox mentioned that they should discuss their marriage with her parents, leaving Vivian confused and reflecting on whether they were officially in love. Suddenly, a noise from outside caught their attention. Vivian, fearing the worst, rushed to the window and opened the curtains to see the commotion. She noticed people arguing and saw a flag, realizing it was the symbol of the Grand Duke Glenn's family. Lennox informed Vivian that the people outside were his team of knights, showing their capability by already finding their way to her place. Vivian's heartbeat quickened with fear, realizing that the timing was terrible. She acknowledged the major problem at hand, the Grand Duke. Shocked, she remembered that she had ripped off his shirt, leaving him with nothing to wear. Frantically looking around, Vivian was confused and muttered to herself, unsure of what to do. She thought quickly and decided to get a shirt for Lennox, planning to borrow one from her brother Cassian. In a hurry, she told Lennox to wait while she fetched a shirt. Lennox sat on the bed, smiling, and Vivian couldn't help but find him a bit cute. Vivian hurriedly reached the wardrobe and exclaimed with relief when she found it. She opened the wardrobe looking for a shirt that would fit Lennox. Grabbing one, she realized it was her dad's shirt, noting that Cassian's shirts were a bit smaller. Deciding it was better than nothing, she resolved to head back to her room. Suddenly, she overheard someone speaking nearby, expressing disbelief about the situation. It was early in the morning, and they couldn't believe the Grand Duke had been kidnapped by a lady. They speculated that the witness must have lied or been mistaken, as hair color like hers was uncommon, leading to the conclusion that it was just a misunderstanding. Vivian worriedly thought about the disastrous consequences if someone saw the Grand Duke naked and sitting on her bed. Panicking, she hurried back to her room. She opened the door and called out, relieved to see Lennox was still alone in the room. Lennox offered her some water, which she drank instantly, feeling a bit calmer. She handed him the shirt she had found, and he put it on, commenting that it fit well and was soft. Thanking her, Vivian nervously laughed and internally reflected that it was she who had ripped his shirt off, feeling he didn't need to thank her for anything. Vivian was about to speak when a voice from outside her room interrupted her, announcing the arrival of the butler. She thought it looked like he had come to her room and tried to reassure herself that it was normal for the Grand Duke and her to be together since they were in love. However, the reality of the situation dawned on her. An unmarried woman taking a man to her bedroom was scandalous. She gloomily realized that if the truth spread, her life would be ruined. She had plans to marry a normal person in a year, but at this rate, she might end up relying on her family forever. Determined to change her fate, she considered developing her skills further. She was good at drawing and writing, so perhaps becoming a fairy tale author sounded like a great idea. The butler knocked on the door, announcing that there was something urgent. Vivian, startled, responded that she would come out. Lennox smiled and asked if she was ready. Vivian, putting on a serious expression, affirmed that she was. Lennox reassured her, saying that she would soon get used to it, both in body and mind. Hearing this, Vivian froze, feeling like she had stepped on a landmine. Nervously, she thought that it wasn't a landmine, but rather that she was being rude to the Grand Duke. Lennox kissed her on the cheek and remarked that if Vivian hadn't kidnapped him, she could have lived a normal life. He expressed that it was a pity. As Lennox held her hand, Vivian felt overwhelmed and struggled to adapt to the physical contact. She was reflecting on how much more intimate their interactions had become recently and panicked over the situation, especially remembering their kiss. In a state of distress, she yelled at Lennox to leave the room. He responded with a laugh, agreeing to leave. Vivian opened the door to find the butler, who was shocked to see the Grand Duke in her room. Nervously, Vivian tried to clarify the situation, insisting that she had not committed any crime. The butler was stunned, asking why the Grand Duke was in her room. Vivian, flustered, gave an excuse, claiming it was a secret meeting, and asked the butler to understand. The butler began to cry, expressing his deep shame and frustration. He felt he had failed in his duties, unable to recognize that Vivian's mental state was unusual and that he was unfit for his position. His emotional reaction added to Vivian's confusion. Vivian reflected on the situation, realizing that the stark difference between her relationship with the Grand Duke and her own expectations made it difficult to convince others of their affection. Despite their contractual relationship, Vivian insisted to the butler that despite appearances, she and the Grand Duke were genuinely in a relationship and that she was not insane. The butler, overwhelmed, expressed concern about her marriage plans, noting that she had previously stated an intention to marry this year. Vivian tried to downplay the situation, questioning when this had been discussed. The butler revealed that he had already sent her portrait to a potential suitor and that her marriage had been a topic of discussion for a week. He mentioned that the second master, presumably the Grand Duke, had shown considerable interest in her. Vivian was taken aback. As Vivian and the butler turned their attention to the sudden noise, they saw that Lennox had forcefully broken the door handle. Lennox, seemingly irritated, commented that the handle was weak. Vivian, astonished, noted that the door handle was made of gilded steel and was securely screwed on, making its breakage almost impossible. She marveled at Lennox's strength, contemplating his skill in swordsmanship and recalling Cashin's words about masters being like monsters. Vivian, feeling nervous and sweating, was overwhelmed by the realization of her sudden involvement with the Grand Duke, finding the situation increasingly intimidating. Vivian, scared, inadvertently blurted out that they could break up in a year. Lennox, with a frustrated smile, asked what she had said. Vivian, embarrassed, tried to correct herself, internally cursing her mistake. She then nervously reiterated that they would break up in a year as previously agreed. Lennox's response, "I don't know," left Vivian stunned and confused. She was bewildered by his sudden change in attitude and the promise he seemed to have forgotten. Lennox then apologized, claiming he remembered nothing about the agreement. Vivian was left in shock. Vivian, deeply worried, reflected on Lennox's claim that he remembered nothing. She feared that he might genuinely forget their agreement and the contract they had made. In a state of panic, she raised her voice, insisting that they had decided to date and expressing her distress at his sudden change in attitude. Vivian, her voice trembling, desperately sought reassurance, repeatedly asking if she was indeed his lover. She realized that she needed to urgently convince him of their arrangement, but Lennox remained silent, offering no response to her pleas. Vivian, desperate and emotional, decided to use her usual tactic, making a teary, pleading expression, much like she did with her parents and Cashin when asking for something. She looked at Lennox with big, sad eyes and requested him to affirm that she was his lover. Lennox began to laugh, which confused Vivian. She wondered if he was teasing her or finding her plea amusing. His laughter made her anxious as she recalled how Cashin often laughed at her in a sarcastic manner. Lennox, still laughing, addressed Vivian, asking her to clarify her role. Startled, Vivian stammered that she was his lover. Lennox responded by stating that first and foremost, she was human. This puzzled Vivian, leading her to think that perhaps his treatment of her would depend on her actions, and she was determined to secure her place as his lover. She thanked him nervously, and Lennox continued to laugh heartily. Vivian, feeling uneasy, questioned why he was laughing so much. Internally, she felt as if she were being teased and was unsure how to handle the situation. The butler looked confused by the unfolding scene. Vivian, sweating with anxiety, realized the situation seemed increasingly chaotic. She decided that it was best to leave before things got worse, prompting her to suggest they get out. She reflected on the seriousness of the situation, noting that while the Grand Duke's knights were intimidating, her own family's knights were no less formidable. She felt it was crucial to avoid any further escalation. Vivian, feeling a surge of confidence, grabbed Lennox's hand and urged him to leave. As they walked, Lennox stopped to say that Vivian was more than just a lover to him, and that she needed to understand that. This revelation left Vivian embarrassed and confused. She wondered if Lennox saw her as more than just a lover, or if he still viewed her through the lens of their peculiar situation. Suddenly, her father called out, startling her. She tried to calm her racing heart and reassured herself that the royal inspector hadn't arrived yet, which meant things might not get more complicated. With a deep breath, Vivian prepared herself for the situation at hand, signaling to Lennox that they could proceed. Lennox smiled in response, and they continued on their way. Vivian's parents were shocked to see Lennox with her, recognizing him immediately. They could hardly believe their eyes and exclaimed that the person next to her was probably the Grand Duke. Vivian tried to explain the situation to her parents, starting to say that she and the Grand Duke were involved. However, the Duke's guards, upon seeing Lennox, interrupted angrily. They felt deceived and shouted that the people before them were fooling them and committing treason by daring to harm the Grand Duke, who was of noble blood. Vivian became anxious, realizing she needed to stop the escalating tension. She urgently told Lennox that they needed to explain everything to the guards. Lennox smiled and agreed, referring to her affectionately as my Vivian. Lennox affectionately lifted Vivian in his arms, causing her to feel deeply embarrassed. Lennox then remarked confidently that no one would think he had been kidnapped. Vivian, flustered, agreed, but internally felt as though she was the one being kidnapped, her heartbeat quickening with anxiety. She reminded herself that solving the current problem was the priority. Seeing them like this, Lennox's guards were stunned and struggled to comprehend the situation, exclaiming in disbelief about Mr. Lennox and the girl with him. Vivian's guards were equally startled, recognizing their lady. Trying to handle the situation with a smile, Vivian greeted them with a nervous hello. The guard, confused and alarmed, asked Mr. Lennox what had happened and who he was carrying in his arms. He speculated that the lady in the palace must have used dark magic to kidnap him. Vivian was shocked and horrified by the accusation, thinking internally about the severe consequences her family would face if she were falsely accused of using dark magic. In her nervousness, she screamed at the guards, denying any knowledge or use of dark magic. She insisted that she didn't even know simple magic, let alone dark magic, and emphasized that she was an ordinary person who didn't even possess swordsmanship skills because of her weakness. Vivian's guard attempted to explain to the Duke's guards that magic had always been difficult for her, leading her to give it up a long time ago. They also mentioned that when a callus appeared on her hand, she didn't even notice it, highlighting her lack of skill in swordsmanship. They added that she had no other talents, emphasizing her ordinariness. Vivian, feeling embarrassed and frustrated internally, thought that they didn't need to make it so clear that she was useless. The Duke's guard, however, remained unconvinced. He questioned the witness's statement that Vivian had kidnapped the Grand Duke, and while drawing his sword, implied that accusing the Grand Duke's loyal servant of lying was a serious matter. Lennox intervened, firmly stating that Vivian Lewis was his lover. The guards were stunned, unable to believe what they heard. Vivian's father, Mr. Lewis, was infuriated and demanded confirmation, which Lennox reiterated. The situation escalated quickly as one of Lennox's guards, Alad, pointed his sword at Lennox. Lennox, unflinching, warned Alad that his actions were tantamount to treason. However, Alad, visibly angry and desperate, insisted that the Grand Duke must be under some evil spell cast by Vivian. Lennox coldly questioned Lloyd, asking if he was prepared to be responsible for calling his lover an evil witch. For a knight, taking responsibility meant betting their life. Lennox reminded Lloyd of his earlier statement, accusing him of not being awake, and reiterated his warning that such disrespect could cost him his life. Trembling in fear, Lloyd dropped his sword and knelt before Lennox. Acknowledging the disrespect, Lennox informed Lloyd that his punishment would be decided later. He then instructed Lloyd to pick up his sword and stay away from him. Lloyd obeyed, acknowledging the command with a fearful, "Yes, my Grand Duke." The other guards whispered among themselves, expressing their disbelief and confusion. They questioned whether Vivian was really the Grand Duke's lover and wondered if it was possible for someone like him to be in love. They speculated on whether she was his type and discussed the implications for Princess Eunice, who might harbor unrequited feelings for him. They also considered Vivian's elevated status and whether it was due to the Grand Duke's opinion or review. Hearing the guards' whispers, Vivian's mind raced with thoughts. She considered Princess Eunice the heir to the throne of Eberron and a significant figure. She realized the importance of the relationship between Eunice and the Grand Duke, noting how it could benefit both the Grand Duke's territory and the Empire. She worried about her own position, questioning if she was just a temporary distraction compared to the more advantageous union with Princess Eunice. However, she quickly chastised herself for such thoughts, reminding herself of how fortunate she was not to be accused of kidnapping. Vivian felt as if she had won a lottery, surprised by her luck in such a chaotic situation. Lennox asked Vivian what she was thinking about, but she hesitated in her response. Nervous, she quickly changed the subject, mentioning that she would explain things when it was just the two of them. Lennox acknowledged the need to clarify the situation with his knights and her family, expressing his frustration with the current state of affairs. He then candidly expressed his desire to carry her to bed, which made Vivian blush and react with surprise at the mention of bed.